Shalom in the name of Yehoshua HaMashiach, and welcome to this video, which is continuing to look at Paul's teachings with regard to women. Now, in this video, we're going to look at what Paul said about the woman's role when the people gather together in the assemblies. Now, Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, the context is that Paul is giving his instructions about how the gathering should be organized. And then he gives instructions in verse 27 about when people speak in other languages, aka tongues. There's certain times when they have to just be quiet if there's no interpreter. Then he gives instructions about prophets, and 2 or 3 at a time, and they have to just speak one by one and not all at once. Then he gives teachings to the sisters, and he says, verse 34, let your women be silent in the assemblies. And that word silent really does mean silent. If we go to the Greek, if we go to a lexicon, Thayer's lexicon, you see there, sigal means to keep silence, to hold one's peace, to be kept in silence, to be concealed. So Paul says, let your women remain silent, be silent, i.e. don't speak, for they are not allowed to speak. And that speak just means speak. It doesn't mean shout or scream or holler or anything like that. Paul said that the women are not allowed to speak in the gatherings, but they are to subject themselves, as the Torah also says. And people usually say that Paul here was referring to Genesis chapter 3 verse 16, where the Most High said that the woman's desire would be to rule for her husband, and her husband would rule over her. So again, just like in the previous video, we see that Paul goes right back to Torah, right back to the scriptures as a foundation for his teaching. He doesn't say anything about just a local circumstance, a local scenario, like some people want to say, oh no, this is just for the Corinthians. No, he just says this is his regular teaching, as in all the assemblies of the set apart ones. As we see there, verse 33. And then even if a woman wants to learn, in other words, if a woman wants more clarification on something, let them ask their own husbands at home. So any questions, he said, even the women who really wanted to learn and wanted to ask a question, they weren't allowed to do that in the gathering. They had to wait till they got home, and then they could ask their own husbands or menfolk at home. Why? Because it's improper, and that improper means, let's have a look at what it means. If we go to the Strong's again, 149, Greek word is iskron, which means shame, base, dishonorable. So Paul says it's a shame, it's base, it's dishonorable for women to speak in an assembly. So this was Paul's teaching concerning the women in an assembly. I know there are 2 or 3 ways in which people try and get around this. They say that maybe he was talking about the Corinthians only. Some people say Paul didn't really write verse 34 and 35. Some people argue that Paul was only talking about causing disturbance, that women were not allowed to cause a disturbance. But then why would he say this to women only and not men? Are we going to say that men are allowed to cause disturbance in the gathering? And besides, he also says if women want to ask any questions, they can't do it in the gathering. They have to wait till they get home. So for me, it's clear what Paul's talking about here. He's restricting the input of women into the gatherings to, they're not allowed to speak, they're not allowed to teach, they're not allowed to prophesy, they're not allowed to even ask questions in the gathering. Men only. Some people believe that this was teaching that Paul had got when he, in his Pharisee from the Pharisees when he was well, he still was a Pharisee, but people believe that this is Pharisaical teaching, and they believe that references to this can be found in rabbinical writings. I'll put some links to these suggestions. I'm not so sure, to be honest. I haven't seen enough evidence to confirm that one way or the other. But what I would say is this, to all those who follow Paul: I hope you're obeying Paul when he talks about women in the gathering, because, as we've seen, he's very clear and very plain that women are not allowed to speak or to even ask questions in the gathering. So I hope that when you guys come together, well, actually, I don't hope. I hope you're disobeying Paul at this point. I hope that when you come together, that women, if a woman has a word, if a woman has a teaching, that they are allowed to step up and give that teaching. I really do hope that if a woman wants to ask a question, that they do step up and ask questions, because I believe that we're all to learn, and we're all to encourage and exhort one another. We saw in the previous video how Yah raises up women to have, to give words to men and to have authority over men sometimes. And so, that being the case, we should continue to do this if we're keeping Torah and if we're following in the ways of the Most High. But if you are doing this, then please be aware that you are ignoring and disobeying the clear teaching of Paul himself, and as you do this, be aware that according to him, when you reject Paul's teachings, you are rejecting the commandments of the Most High himself. He says here, let him acknowledge what I write to you, that they are a command of the Master. In other words, these are not his own personal teachings, prejudices. In his own opinion, he believed that when he taught these things, he was teaching directly from heaven.